What are you doing? Just put it back in the bag and board. Back and board. Not meant to be read and folded. I only have 25 of these. Jesus.
Welcome to iFanboy, the comic book discussion show. My name is Connor Kilpatrick. I'm here with...
Hello, Josh Flanagan.
And
I'm Ron Richards. This time around, we thought we'd talk about probably a titan, safe to say a titan in the comic industry, Jim Lee.
Jim Lee is a titan in the comics.
Jim Lee's currently the co-publisher of DC Comics, but you may know him from such hits as, where he's been working at DC since the late 90s when his imprint, WildStorm, which was part of Image Comics originally, was bought by DC. Jim Lee was one of the founders of Image Comics.
Forgot to call Alan Moore and thank him.
Exactly.
That's what happened.
He was one of the founders of Image Comics, which changed the face of the comic industry in the 90s, and he came to prominence by his work at Marvel in the late 80s, early 90s.
And there's this brand new book from Titan about DC, Jim Lee's DC work, so that was the impetus of talking
Icons.
About it. Yes, Icons. And so we got this book, and it's a beautiful, beautiful art book, and kind of a whole kind of, it's gotta be pretty cool to get this, if you get this book about you written and done and everything, it's kind of, but...
it's weird. It's full of DC and Wildstorm art about Jim Lee. DC didn't publish it.
Was Titan owned by Warner Brothers?
I don't know.
Probably. Anyway, who knows? But either way, it's a beautiful book, and it got us talking about Jim Lee and his presence in the industry, both from an art standpoint as well as from a business standpoint.
And that's really, I mean, the thing is that, and we're going to get to that, we're going to talk about his art for a little while, and then we're going to talk about his enormous impact in the business. This seems to keep getting more and more significant as we keep going. But most people would think of him first and know him first as an artist.
He's still considered one of the top art guys, even though he doesn't do really art.
He does doodles on a cover, and that's good for 15,000 copies extra, probably.
He still sells mammothly. And
well, let's go back in time. Yeah. All right, so we read the books. You were out of comics at this point when he hit it big.
Ray, I was leaving. Actually, I read his first. I read.
Well, no, this is we're talking like 88, 89.
That's what I was reading. Okay, I read I bought the issues with Jubilee and all. Like I actually was reading in that time.
We were talking about this earlier. For a lot of us, when we started reading comics, there was one artist that kind of defined the look that we saw comics.
Todd McFarlane, but we're not talking about him right now.
For you, like Kurt Swan?
McGuire.
Oh, McGuire. Kevin McGuire, because Justice Leagues, that sort of thing. For me, it happened to be Jim Lee.
Yep.
What happened was that I got into the X-Men books in 88, 89. My first issue was Excalibur number 19, which I talked a lot, which I can't remember who drew that. I used to know.
Not
Terry
Alan Davis.
Kavanaugh. Not Alan Davis. It was one Alan Davis, which oddly it wasn't Alan Davis. But the second comic book I ever bought was Uncanny X-Men number 269, which was Rogue fighting Ms. Marvel in the Savage Land, and it was drawn by Jim Lee. And this is maybe not within the first 10 issues of Jim Lee's run on Uncanny X-Men. He'd done a couple fill-ins, and then he started to issue 268 was the introduction of Gambit, which I wish that was the first one, but because then I paid $30 for it.
I have that one. It's over there.
Now it's worth. Well, anyway.
But so for me, the comics and most notably the X-Men, but then also comic books, Jim Lee defined what at that point I'm 12 years old, and I'm like, this is what comic books look like. And it was very indicative of the time period, that late 80s, early 90s. Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane are two that they're kind of all bunched in together in a very Jim Lee's style was very cross-hatched, very
delicately rendered.
Yeah,
lots of detail, lots of lines.
And when comic book analysts and pundits and stuff like that looked at the early 90s, and you looked at the comics that were being published through the 70s and 80s, they were a lot of clean style, a lot of safe, a lot of whatever, and the times were changing, and we came out of 1986 in The Watchmen and Dark Knight, and the stories were starting to get more mature, and so a lot of people who've analyzed the art thought Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld's art, with their jagged lines and their like kind of harsher kind of view on things, reflected the times as well. But for me, the X-Men, Adjectiveless X-Men's launch was like the pinnacle of the comic moment.
It's a big deal. When I was in high school, me and all the other guys who read comics sort of found each other. I don't even know how, but we all drew, and everyone.
There were no girls.
No, there weren't. The guys we were all in the art club in school. We all read comics, and everyone tried to draw like Jim Lee. I mean, that was the big deal. The Jim Lee's art. I was more of a Perez guy. This is that style, but and I couldn't draw that way anyway. Yeah. So I did try, but but there was guys in the club who could draw that way. But if Jim Lee was worshipped.
Wait, you want me to draw like Jim Lee? I'll draw like Jim Lee.
Jim Lee was worshipped. He was worshipped.
There was something about it that was just, and I don't know what it is. I shouldn't say qual, whatever, but it just felt special. And like when he wouldn't do an issue, or when you look at another book, it didn't seem to match. And I don't know if it was Scott Williams' inks, the combination of the two working together. But for me, an issue of Uncanny X-Men or the issue of X-Men was sit down, read it, and pore over the art.
Now the thing that's interesting to me is that I wasn't really reading at the time that after he blew up. I was there when he started around. But I think it's fascinating today is that he actually still garners that kind of response from a lot of people.
Yep.
I can't think of another artist who is that. Like if you put something out, it almost doesn't matter what it is.
But even if you take the guys from that period, McFarlane, Liefeld, Larson still drawing, none of them garner that.
No, I think if
hysteria
McFarlane still drew more, you might see it close to that. He's probably the closest. But other than that,
I don't even think you would. I really don't think you would.
There's something about Jim Lee, just the fact that so he works at Marvel, and then the big walkout, and he joins the other guys, and he's one of the first 7 co-founders of Image Comics. They all launched their own flagship titles, and McFarlane's Spawn sold millions, and Liefeld's Youngblood sold millions. Wildcats was Jim Lee's creation, and despite the writing being not so good, it still sold purely on his art. I mean, it was the idea that if you wanted to get Jim Lee, this is where you need to get it from. And in that time period is when it just got, it got a little crazy because he started doing Wildcats and he did Death Blow. He was launching a bunch of titles and creating characters and doing character designs. We're talking about his character designs. I love his character designs and his costume designs and things like that. I've always
they tend to feel a little of the time, but that's your favorite time.
Yeah.
I do think some of them live with a little bit of updating. I was saying earlier that Grifter from Wildcats is actually, I love that. I love the mask design. I love the fact that it's just a piece of cloth that sort of goes this way, and it's just it's a different play on a superhero mask, which is not. I mean, think about how many superhero masks there are.
Long,
but then also,
cool. But even Spartan and Wildcats, I love the color.
That one feels a little of the time.
Sure, it does.
It just looks like Cable with skin.
Yeah. Sure. But then, so his art was great. That's always been the selling point. But then as the 90s went on, he got busy. He was publishing at WildStorm.
Actually, you can see the beginning of him, Gimli the businessman, very early on.
Yeah.
He didn't really... Image blows up and launches, and I don't remember how long he went in Wildcats, but very soon, all of a sudden, it was like he's a little bit here. Jim Lee would do a little bit here, he did a little bit here, a little bit here.
When you look at early Travis Charest, it's Jim Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I thought was really interesting when I went back and looked at them. I was like, oh, he's just doing Jim Lee, which makes sense. It was a good move.
Yeah.
They all had studio guys that drew like them that would do their books.
But then, so you get a couple of years. He'd do some work, he'd do some covers, but then he'd go away. I remember when he came out with Divine Right.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh my God, it's a new series by Gimli, and it wasn't good. I mean, it wasn't, but what was interesting, if you go back and look at that, that was in the late 90s, and that had to do with a kid on the internet, and it was like Gimli's always been, he's one of the few comics creators that is very tech savvy and tech interested. Like, I feel as if he's always been, WildStorm was on the cutting edge of coloring, and a lot of that was Louis Portacio, but I'm sure Gimli was, supportive of it. He's very active on the internet early on, and, even now you see him active
he draws on the iPad,
yeah,
he walks
he's
around.
active on Twitter and all that sort of stuff.
And he's in charge of DC's digital initiative, so he's always been a forward-thinking guy.
Yeah, exactly. But Divine Right, even not being very good, still sold great, and was although I totally forgot about it until I saw it in this book. But I have all the issues. It's just interesting. It's the only way I can describe it is phenomenon. Like I just don't.
He's a genuine comic book phenomenon.
Well, I mean, but that's one thing, and I don't know why I'm the one bringing this up, but I mean, clearly there's got to be some sort of raw talent component there. Something about his art that speaks to people. Now, for me, for a long time, I'm not a big Jim Lee fan.
Right.
I looking through this book, actually, it's really interesting that he does a lot of different styles that I like a lot more than the ones that he's primarily known for.
Well, yeah. Well, it's like recently in that Vertigo Resurrection, didn't he did a story with Brian Azzarello that was a completely different style.
Yeah, and I liked it a lot.
He did that story in Liberty Comics with Neil Gaiman that was very. He does every now and then he'll do that gray background kind of minimalist kind of drawing. And like the dude's got art talent.
He's extremely talented. The question is. He knows what sells books, so he draws this way because this is what people want to buy.
Boob, butt, muscle.
Yeah, hot girls, muscle-bound guys, great action, and he's figured
cross-hatching.
Cross-hatching, and that's
add a soupçon of cross-hatching.
And it sells and it works. But if flipping through this Icons book, you see every now and then like there's
kind of a painted style he can do. There's a very heavy dark line style he can do. Kind of almost Darwin Cookie from the Parker series, like very thick, dark blacks.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But he knows what pays the bills or not anymore. But
Well, that's an elephant in the room. You know, modern readers, people who are reading today, are going to know him as a guy who doesn't draw that much, and when he does start something, it doesn't always finish.
Yep.
Wildcats relaunch.
Wildcats still waiting for issue number 2.
All-Star Batman and Robin. Yep. There was another one too.
Anything else?
He did go through. He finished Batman Hush. They said he would. He did that.
The Superman Azzarello run that
Tomorrow.
he did. Yeah, whatever.
Man of Tomorrow.
Man of Tomorrow. Batman. What else was there? Was there something else?
I think those are the last 2 I could think of
much,
him finishing a project. And Batman was the first, Superman was the second, I believe, and that was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely few and far between. And part of it was because he was running WildStorm. He was running part of Image. Then he sold WildStorm to DC
in the late
90s, and not only still was the publisher of WildStorm, but then was a high muckety muck at DC. He was
a VP at DC.
He was a VP at DC, helping their business and things like that. There have been rumors as to what other things distracted him. Including MMOs, but
and this brings us to sort of the new Jim Lee,
current Jim Lee,
the other side of Jim Lee, the one that really is affecting comics now, probably a lot more than he ever was as an artist.
Yep.
You had said something to me about Jim Lee's primary aspiration.
Well, I've heard this. I've heard this
this is a rumor.
In conversations in back rooms of comic book stores over the years. What I've heard is that Jim Lee has his. I feel bad saying it because I cannot validate this.
Okay, that's the disclaimer is out there.
The rumor was that his desire was to be editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. That he grew up a Marvel fan, loved drawing Marvel Comics, and wanted to one day take over the editorial.
Now, what's behind that is that didn't say he wanted to become Jack Kirby. He didn't want to become John Romita. He wanted to be in charge of it. He wanted to be the guy behind
publisher,
the business.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is that.
Yeah, and basically, if you're watching from the sidelines, DC, Marvel's main rival, used him as a pawn, bought
the company to get him, basically.
Bought WildStorm to get him. It was a talent acquisition.
Well, I'm sure there's other stuff too.
Yeah.
They were selling books at the time.
Alan Moore.
Yeah, sure. But it was a main talent acquisition. And then if you look at some of the best-selling DC books over the past 10 years, Batman Hush, Jim Lee is associated to them, whether he's doing covers or things like that. And then now he's the co-publisher of DC along with Dan DiDio. He's kind of achieved that dream, but it's interesting because it's not Marvel. So
it's interesting. A publisher is above editor-in-chief.
True.
It's co-publisher. Yeah. But then the other thing is when you mentioned an MMO, there's a rumor that he played too much World of Warcraft, but I don't know how much I buy that, honestly. But the other part is that he's been hugely involved in the DCU Online.
Yeah, I mean,
huge designed the entire world, all the characters.
Exactly. So it's affecting that business, and it's interesting how he's taking his interests. He started playing EverQuest and World of Warcraft and all that sort of stuff.
Video games, technology, and publishing, and not so much the drawing, but the business side of it.
But take I remember a comment or something somewhere. It's like, I wish you'd do books again. That would really sell them. His work on the MMO for DC is going to expose more people to those characters than any comic book, not that he's ever done, but that would be done today.
Right.
And it also will probably generate more revenue than the comics he would draw.
Now, what's interesting though about him being on DC is that I've never, I won't say I love Wildcats and the stuff that he's done in WildStorm, like that stuff I've always loved. Mm-hmm. I've never felt too comfortable with his work at DC because it's always felt not right. It's good. Like his rendering of Superman is good. His rendering of Batman is good. All the stuff like that. But for me, because I grew up with X-Men, I want him back on X-Men. I would want him doing Marvel. Mm-hmm. And it just is never going to happen. But it never quite sits. Seeing him do Wonder Woman never sits right with me.
His style is so iconic to an age and it was a Marvel age. At least the books were that. I feel the same way. I still see his work and it doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
I think it's good. I'm not a huge fan anymore. When I was 13, it was the big deal. I've sort of grown into liking different kind of art now. I still appreciate it, but I'm not a big fan.
The great example of this, though, is that we often talk about, whether you buy titles for the titles or buy them for the creators. And now we've been talking a lot on our audio podcast about Superman and how I don't, I bought the Jim Lee, Brian Azzarello run because it was Jim Lee.
This is my question. What's it about? Okay.
Today,
I thought maybe you'd know. I've yet to find anyone who does.
Yeah.
If you see a book has Jim Lee on it for art, does that make you?
He will buy it.
I know. Yeah. You buy it.
No. I'm going to buy it.
Any of them?
Any of them.
Really? Yeah. If he does.
If he pencils a book, I'm buying.
So you have all of All-Star.
Century.
Yes.
Century loves Superman.
That'd be awesome.
I would totally buy that. I would buy the crap out of that.
And it's like they're living together. It's like a romantic comedy.
They're roommates.
Would you buy?
Well, not based on Jim Lee.
You wouldn't buy a book because Jim Lee was on it.
No, but it wouldn't be a deterrent either.
I bought All-Star Batman. I bought All-Star Batman
and Robin.
But I didn't buy All-Star Superman.
Did you read them?
Yes, of course.
Okay, well, no, I'm just like
the issue with the
I'm
Green
sorry to have to
Lantern
ask
where
that.
they painted
I
the
didn't
room
buy it.
yellow. Yeah.
He's not someone I would buy it for, but he's not someone I wouldn't buy it for.
well,
I'll buy
right.
it blindly. It's blind.
Really?
Yeah. New
Well,
series.
lucky for you,
Yeah.
it doesn't cost him a lot these days.
Yeah, exactly, because there's not that much.
But there's people out there who will buy a book because of the Gimli cover.
Oh yeah, no. Well, the Intimates. I mean, that was. I mean, Jim and Joe Casey. Immediately, I like Joe's work, but Jim Lee did the covers and designed the characters, and somebody else drew it. I still bought it. Like Divine Right, I bought. Like
Yeah. You're special,
I'm pretty sure I bought everything he's done. I'm not sure. Well, no, I'm not sure, but I'm fairly certain that everything he's penciled out.
My favorite thing he's ever done is Ex Machina number 40.
Yeah, that was good.
That's
really good. He's very good, and I don't want to sound like I don't like his work anymore.
I don't buy covers. I don't.
Yeah. But it's just for me. I agree with Ron. It doesn't feel like DC when he draws them, even though there's stuff that looks good. We flipped through the book and so that's good. That's nice. I like that. But on the whole, it still feels like a Marvel style.
Yep.
I always associated DC with cleaner art, like I was saying. But I grew up with that. That's what I grew up with Perez and Byrne and McGuire doing the books I read.
Not to go controversial, but he designed a new Wonder Woman costume.
Yeah, exactly.
She has a tiny jacket.
Just showing the effect that he has on the industry.
No, absolutely.
He's
He's a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, he's like a muckety-muck. Like, if he's like, I'd like to do that, okay, you're the boss.
What I find really interesting, and this highlights it in here, is that over the years he's done some one-offs or pin-ups for like Vertigo. Which cracks me up. Like he did a couple covers and pin-ups for Transmet, your favorite book.
Yeah, oh yeah.
He did one in DMZ, number 50 recently. He did.
It's always weird.
Yeah, 100 Bullets, Preacher.
You want to talk about a guy who epitomizes mainstream comics.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about him.
There's this Transmet picture.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about him is that he's good. He's fine. But I feel like his effect, people trying to ape him, has been bad.
Well, yeah, that's the.
I think that the worst part about Jim Lee is all the people who came after and tried to do his style and didn't do it well.
Yeah.
And what that did was create a bunch of ugly comics.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that he did that because
He can't control that.
Right.
So.
No, he can't. But it's an interesting sort of side effect.
Yeah.
The thing is, he's very, 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 very talented. You can see it. You can see it through the different styles. In this book, you can see when he posts the stuff he just draws on his iPad,
Yeah.
which is not a very precise device.
Yeah.
But he's very, very talented artist, and he still holds that sway over a large segment of the comic book reading public.
And if you look at the top tier, I mean, he is both cross Marvel, DC, Image, Independence, whatever. He is a top 10 creator. He is one of the creators who are defining comics for the past 20 years
In different ways.
But
I was gonna say, but the common trait that I've seen from those guys is a true love of comics.
Yep.
I agree with that.
He loves comics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like even somebody who like Rob Liefeld, who I wouldn't put in that top 10, top tier, but definitely affected comics and stuff like that. Just the love of comics. You see them writing on Twitter. They're like, they're living the dream.
Let's tell a story about Jimmy's love of comics. If you go, you may not know this if you don't go to a convention, but he will, like in Chicago.
Oh yes, yeah.
He showed up at C2E2 Chicago. He did
sketches,
10 or so sketches,
and hid
that guy gets a line,
and hid them all around the convention center,
and would tweet out hints.
And it'd be like there'd be one, behind something in the bathroom,
in the girls' bathroom,
and that's just his love of creating excitement for comics. I mean, you can't get a Jim Lee sketch, but you can if you randomly stumble across one behind the garbage can in the back of the convention. I mean, that's what's cool about that. Yeah, it's a very cool thing.
Yeah, and the things like you said at cons when he signs, it's a huge long line. I mean, I've been lucky enough to interview him a couple of times. It's not easy. To get him to get interviewed.
And he's got that really busy businessman air about him, where he's got a meeting to go to immediately.
Yeah. But
the other thing is since he was the guy in the '90s when people were reading comics in the millions, or probably not in the millions, in the high hundreds of thousands. Yeah. If you talk to a lapsed comic reader, almost always the first question is, what's Gimli doing?
Yep.
Yeah. What I think is fascinating about him is you take a guy who was a penciler. I mean, and a penciler doesn't necessarily need to have a lot of business acumen. They don't need to be able to talk about all of
Often they don't.
They need to be able to draw, or not, but get pages in on time. And when you hear him speak now, he sounds like an executive.
Yeah,
like a tech executive.
Well, he's been executive for 10 plus years.
Exactly.
He went to Princeton.
I find that it's really interesting.
He's a really smart guy. Yeah, he went to Princeton.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he was pre-med and he
his
bailed.
poor parents.
Yeah, I think he bailed.
I think his parents are okay.
They're okay now, but there was a moment.
Well, and the thing is also, like, if you look at him,
I don't think there was a moment. He jumped right into the perfect time.
Honestly, and we're a little bit of gushing here, and the thing is that the big black cloud is the lateness and is
the fact that he hasn't put books out anymore.
I don't consider him a comic book artist anymore.
But that's the thing. Yeah, he's not a regular artist, and that's
he's an executive.
Exactly.
creator
But
anymore.
if you kind of look at him for the past 20 years, he kind of is like a modern Renaissance man because like he went to Princeton, he drew comic books, started a business, sold the business, went off, lived in Italy for years. He, he got he's involved in technology, designing video games. I mean, like if you look at that whole spectrum,
now publishes the second biggest.
kind of mind blowing, So I mean, a great success story, and
I'd say he's an icon.
And that's why he's more important now than he was when he was drawing. I
Yes,
think
I agree.
the cumulative effect of what he's done in the last 10 years.
I agree.
He was a big deal in this era, in the late, was it 92,
Well, I mean,
93?
it was a great deal. He was a huge, the driving
it's
comic book
signed.
sales. Wow, it's by Claremont. Whatever. Driving comic book sales in the early 90s was a huge part of because of his art. Then he helped change the face of the industry by forming Image. That was huge. Which,
he changed the industry,
Yeah, totally changed it. And then
Broke that mold by selling.
by selling
part
it,
of
yeah,
Image.
the only person at Image to sell to another company, and then now, and like the kind of thing was like 5 years ago, like he wasn't really very active, and like they tried to relaunch the WildStorm universe, and we had that
times.
the fumble of Wildcats written by Grant Morrison, or one issue came out, drawn by I bought that,
Yeah.
drawn by Gimli.
I bought that.
One issue came out, yeah, and then he would do All-Star Batman, and it was like this kind of one-off projects, but you could tell he was kind of off doing other stuff. But now it's like this is
He's
almost
engaged.
like a third. This is almost like a third act, you know,
Yeah.
like which is unheard of in an industry, So good on you.
Especially
Gimli.
one where, even though it's based on people reading books for 20 years, often the creators are cycled out, never heard from them again.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Reinvented himself.
And it's amazing how, despite the lateness and the problems, he still has he gets the huge lines, has an amazing fan base. People walking, the guys with the long boxes to get stuff signed,
I hate
like
those guys.
1991,
1991.
Really?
junior high school.
Awesome.
Yeah.
They probably have lots to say about Jim Lee. I'm guessing.
I'm sure you're going to have a lot of
You
opinions.
can go to iFanboy.com. You can leave your comments under this show or read all the other stuff there. Make sure you check out the other podcasts that we have. We Pick of the Week podcast. We talk about the weekly books. If a Jim Lee book comes out, chances are we'll talk about it because we know he's going to buy it.
Yep.
So you can listen to that. You can listen to the Don't Miss podcast on Mondays. That would be
That'd
good.
be very cool. And if you have any questions about Gimli or comments you want to provide, you can shoot us an email at contact@ifanboy.com, or you can leave us a voicemail at 1-888-FANBOYS. That's 1-888-326-2697. Maybe we'll get it on the show. Never know.
Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/ifanboy. That's where we update stuff. That's where you get the news. People often write in and say, hey, what happened to this? We say, well, we announced on Twitter what happened to this.
Exactly.
So follow us there. Or go to ifanboy.com/store where you can buy we have t-shirts for sale. You can become a member. Member support is really how this thing continues. So become a member, help us out. You get free stuff. You might get somebody won these books because they were a member.
Exactly.
And they're going to get them. And it's been signed by Claremont.
They're going to get them whether they want them or
We're
not.
giving away stuff all the time to members only, so you got to be a member in order to win. So go to ifanboy.com/store, and that's where you can sign up there. I want to go look up. After the show, I'm going to look up to see everything's done, see if I have it all. Because now I'm really curious, because I'm pretty sure I've bought everything.
Yeah.
Okay. I saw
He said everything.
I saw everything.
It was too late. Wait, you bought 25 copies of each
25
cover.
of it. Yeah, 25.
125 copies of the first issue. That's why it sold 4 million copies.
Yeah, I have 25 copies of this cover.
Okay.
Did you see? I don't know if it was
Do you have
ironic.
like an odd number one so that you have like one extra that you could read?
No, I think I read the first one. I didn't read the Gatefold. I thought this was going to be I bought 25 of this one. I thought it was going to be the granddaddy of them because it was like the image style printing.